The Art of War. Winning Without Fighting. Sun Tzu's Timeless Strategies for Modern Work and Career. Audiobook Edition, Work and Career. Roko. Narrator's Note. This is the Work and Career edition of The Art of War, Winning Without Fighting. Each of Sun Tzu's 13 chapters has been applied specifically to your professional life, your career, your workplace relationships, your negotiations, and the moments that define a professional trajectory. Throughout this audiobook, you will encounter field notes sections. These are practical reflection prompts. When you hear a field notes section, consider pausing the recording to think through the questions, or return to them after the chapter ends. They are designed to move you from listening to doing. Introduction. Why a 2,500-year-old book about war is the most useful thing you'll hear this year. There is a book that has been continuously in print for over 2,000 years. It has been carried into battle by generals, studied in the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies, assigned in military academies from West Point to Sandhurst, and quoted in everything from corporate strategy presentations to self-help podcasts. It is 63 pages long. It was written by a Chinese military strategist sometime around 500 BC. And there is a reasonable chance that until now, you have never read it, or if you have, you read it as an interesting historical curiosity rather than a living instruction manual for your actual life. This audiobook is an attempt to change that. The Art of War by Sun Tzu is not really about war. It never was. It uses the language of armies and generals and terrain because those were the stakes of Sun Tzu's world. The consequences of poor strategy were measured in bodies and kingdoms. But the underlying subject is something far more universal: how to think clearly, act effectively, and navigate conflict and competition in a world that is complex, unpredictable, and rarely arranged for your convenience. The battlefield was simply the context in which these ideas were forged. The ideas themselves belong to every human being who has ever had to make a difficult decision, compete for something they wanted, or try to build something meaningful in conditions that weren't cooperating. Which is to say, the ideas belong to you. Why now? The world has changed in ways that make Sun Tzu's thinking more relevant, not less. The pace of information has accelerated to the point where acting before thinking has become the default mode for most people in most situations. The complexity of navigating modern organizations has increased faster than our instincts have adapted. The number of decisions a person makes in a day, about attention, about resources, about relationships, about risk, has expanded dramatically, while the wisdom infrastructure to support those decisions has not kept pace. Sun Tzu's core proposition: think before you act, know yourself and your situation clearly, choose your ground carefully, and apply the right force at the right moment, is not just still valid. In a world of relentless noise, impulsive reaction, and strategic drift, it is more urgently needed than ever. What this audiobook is. This is the Work and Career edition. Each of Sun Tzu's 13 original chapters is brought to life through the lens of your professional life, your career, your workplace, your negotiations, and the moments that define a professional trajectory. Each chapter opens with the original wisdom, a faithful, plain-language account of what Sun Tzu actually said. Following that, you will hear the core principles, a distilled set of the chapter's key ideas. Then comes the heart of each chapter, a direct, specific application of Sun Tzu's thinking to your work and career. Every chapter closes with field notes, practical reflection prompts designed to move you from listening to doing. A note on Sun Tzu. Very little is known with certainty about Sun Tzu himself. The name may refer to a single historical figure, a general named Sun Wu who served the king of Wu in ancient China around 500 BC, or it may be a composite identity, the accumulated wisdom of multiple strategists writing across a longer period. The debate among scholars is genuine and unresolved. What is not in dispute is the text itself, its extraordinary compression of insight, its structural coherence, its refusal to be reduced to simple maxims without losing something essential. Whoever wrote it understood human nature, competition, conflict, and the relationship between knowledge and action with a precision that most writers across the subsequent 2.5 millennia have not surpassed. One last thing before we begin. Sun Tzu opens The Art of War with a statement of the highest seriousness: the art of war is of vital importance. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or ruin. He is not being dramatic. He is establishing the stakes, not to frighten, but to insist on a quality of attention that most people reserve for very few things in their lives. The generals who studied Sun Tzu and understood him deeply did not simply find him interesting. They found him useful, in the most consequential sense of that word. That is what this audiobook is for. The battlefield is different now. The principles are not. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Laying plans. Think before you move. Calculate before you speak. Prepare before you act. The general who wins a battle makes many calculations before the battle is fought. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The original wisdom. Sun Tzu opens The Art of War with a statement that might be the most important sentence in the entire book: the art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. In other words, don't take this lightly. Before a single soldier moves, before a single arrow is fired, Sun Tzu insists on 5 fundamental factors that determine the outcome of any conflict. He calls them the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline. In plain language, he's asking 5 questions. Do your people believe in what they're fighting for? What are the conditions outside your control: timing, weather, circumstance? What is the actual terrain you're operating on? Is your leader someone people will follow through difficulty? And is there a clear, disciplined plan for how this all gets executed? Sun Tzu's key insight is that the general who answers these 5 questions honestly, and whose answers are stronger than their opponents, wins before the battle begins. Victory, he argues, is not something you achieve in the chaos of fighting. It's something you manufacture in the quiet before the fight starts. He goes further. He says you must compare your situation to your enemies across all 5 factors. Where are you stronger? Where are they weaker? Where are the gaps you can exploit? This is not paranoia, it's precision. The general who goes to war without this analysis is not brave, Sun Tzu says. They're reckless. There's also a line in this chapter that often gets overlooked: all warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu doesn't mean lie to everyone. He means, don't show your full hand before you need to. When you're strong, appear uncertain. When you're ready to move, appear still. This is not manipulation, it's strategic patience. The entire first chapter is essentially a case for one habit: thinking before acting. Most people lose in life not because they lack talent or resources, but because they act before they've properly assessed the situation. They take the job without researching the company culture. They send the angry email without thinking about what they actually want to achieve. Sun Tzu saw this 2,500 years ago. Nothing has changed. The core principles. Every important endeavor deserves serious analysis before you begin. Treat your plans as a matter of life and death, not an afterthought. 5 things determine outcomes: belief in the cause, external conditions, the terrain, the quality of leadership, and the discipline of execution. The side that answers these questions most honestly wins before the contest starts. Victory is manufactured in preparation, not discovered in the middle of a crisis. Compare yourself to the competition honestly, where you're strong, where you're weak, and where the real opportunities are. Don't reveal your full strategy prematurely. Strategic patience is a form of power. Recklessness dressed up as boldness is still recklessness. Applying it at work. You're up for a promotion. Your first instinct is to walk into your manager's office and make your case. That's the reckless general charging into battle. Before you move, do what Sun Tzu would do: analyze the 5 factors. Do you genuinely believe in what you're asking for, and does your track record back it up? What are the external conditions right now? Is the company in a cost-cutting phase, or a growth phase? What's the terrain? Is your manager the decision maker, or does this go higher? Is your relationship with your manager strong enough to have this conversation? And do you have a clear, structured case ready? Most people lose career battles not because they don't deserve the outcome, but because they fight on bad ground at the wrong time with no plan. Before any high-stakes conversation, a salary negotiation, a difficult confrontation, a pitch for a new idea, write down your 5 factors. The clarity alone will change how you enter the room. And remember Sun Tzu's note on deception: don't tip your hand too early. If you're job hunting, don't announce it. If you're planning a big move at work, let it happen before you broadcast it. Information is leverage, and you give it away cheaply when you share too soon. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Before your next important work conversation, answer these 3 questions. What do I actually want from this? What do they want? What's the realistic outcome if I'm wrong about either? The person who wins most consistently isn't the most talented, the most aggressive, or the luckiest. They're the one who thinks longest and most honestly before they move. Chapter 2. Waging war. Every conflict has a cost. The longer it runs, the more it takes from you, whether you're winning or not. In war, let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The original wisdom. Sun Tzu's 2nd chapter opens with numbers. Specific, sobering numbers. He lists the resources required to wage war, the chariots, the armor, the arrows, the provisions, and then delivers his central point: when you engage in actual fighting, if victory is long in coming, the men's weapons will grow dull and their ardor will be diminished. Keep an army in the field too long, and it doesn't just cost money. It costs spirit. It costs sharpness. It costs the will to keep going. This chapter is not really about war. It's about the hidden cost of prolonged effort, and why speed, efficiency, and knowing when to end something are just as important as knowing how to fight. Sun Tzu makes a point that surprises most first-time readers. He says a wise general feeds his army from the enemy's land rather than shipping supplies from home. Every resource that travels a long distance gets depleted along the way. The closer your resources are to where they're needed, the less waste. He also introduces a principle that modern psychology would eventually confirm thousands of years later: prolonged conflict changes people. It makes them harder, more desperate, less rational. A project that goes months over schedule doesn't just cost money. It demoralizes the team, erodes trust, and often produces worse work than a faster, leaner version would have. Sun Tzu's prescription is blunt: in war, then, let your great object be victory, not lengthy campaigns. He's not saying rush carelessly. He's saying that speed of resolution, when paired with adequate preparation, is itself a form of excellence. There is a deeper wisdom running underneath all of this. Sun Tzu understood something about human energy that most people only discover after burning through it. It is finite, it depletes faster under stress than we expect, and once it's gone, it doesn't come back quickly. Protecting your energy, your resources, your people's morale, your own focus, is not laziness. It is strategy. The chapter ends with a line worth remembering: there is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. Replace country with your name. Replace warfare with whatever drawn-out battle you're currently in the middle of. The question isn't whether you can survive a long fight. It's whether surviving it is actually winning. The core principles. Every conflict, project, and campaign has a cost, and that cost compounds the longer things drag on. Speed of resolution, when backed by solid preparation, is a mark of skill, not impatience. Human energy, morale, and focus are finite resources that must be managed as carefully as money. Prolonged battles change the people fighting them, often for the worse, regardless of the outcome. Source your resources as close to where they're needed as possible, reduce the distance between effort and result. The goal is victory, not the performance of effort. Looking busy is not the same as moving forward. Knowing when to end something, and ending it cleanly, is one of the most underrated strategic skills. Applying it at work. There is a particular kind of professional suffering that nobody talks about enough: the slow-burning project that never quite ends. You know the one. It started with clear goals and genuine energy. Somewhere around month 3 it started drifting. Deadlines moved. Scope expanded. The people involved stopped being excited and started being resigned. By the time it finally limps to completion, or quietly gets shelved, everyone involved is a little more cynical than they were before. Sun Tzu would diagnose this immediately: you waged a long campaign when a short one was possible. Somewhere along the way, the cost of continuing exceeded the value of the outcome, but no one had the clarity or authority to call it. The professional application of this chapter is twofold. First, develop a genuine allergy to unnecessary prolongation. Meetings that could be emails. Decisions that sit in committee for weeks. Feedback cycles that loop endlessly without resolution. Every one of these is a supply line stretched too far, burning resources without producing victory. Second, learn to recognize the cost of performing effort rather than producing results. Many workplace cultures reward presence, busyness, and the appearance of hard work over actual outcomes. Sun Tzu has zero patience for this. If the goal is victory, everything that isn't moving you toward victory is waste, and waste, at scale, loses wars. One practical reframe: before committing to any significant work initiative, ask not just can we do this, but what does done actually look like, and what's our deadline for deciding this isn't working? Building an exit condition into the beginning of a project is not pessimism. It's the kind of thinking that saves teams from the 6-month slog. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Identify one ongoing project or commitment in your professional life that has been running longer than it should. Ask honestly: is this still moving toward a clear victory, or am I continuing out of sunk cost and momentum? What would it look like to resolve it, one way or another, in the next 2 weeks? The measure of a campaign isn't how hard you fought, it's how efficiently you reached a resolution and how much you had left when it was over. Chapter 3. Attack by Stratagem. The greatest victory is the one that requires no fight at all. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The original wisdom. If the first chapter of The Art of War is about preparation and the second is about efficiency, the third is about something far more elegant: winning without the battle ever happening. Sun Tzu opens this chapter with a statement that stops most readers in their tracks: in the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it is not so good. He's making a point that cuts against every instinct we have about competition and conflict. We are conditioned to think that winning means defeating. Sun Tzu says that's not just wrong, it's wasteful, and often self-defeating. The supreme skill, he argues, is to subdue your opponent without fighting. To win through strategy, positioning, and intelligence rather than through force. This is not passivity, it requires more sophistication, more patience, and more genuine understanding of the situation than simply attacking does. He ranks the methods of victory in order. The highest is to attack the enemy's strategy, to understand their plan and neutralize it before it unfolds. The next is to disrupt their alliances. Below that is to attack their army in the field. And the worst of all options, Sun Tzu says, is to besiege a walled city. Sieges are slow, costly, and unpredictable, the last resort of a general who has run out of better ideas. Then comes one of the most quoted lines in the entire book: if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. This isn't just a military observation. It is a complete theory of self-awareness as competitive advantage. Knowing yourself, your actual strengths, your real weaknesses, your genuine limits, is the hardest and most strategically important work you can do. The chapter ends with one underlying idea: think your way to victory before you fight your way there. Force is the last tool, not the first. The core principles. The best outcome in any conflict is one where the underlying problem is solved without open confrontation. Attack the strategy, not the person, neutralize the plan before it becomes a battle. The methods of victory rank from highest to lowest: outthink, outmaneuver, outnegotiate, then, only if necessary, outfight. A direct assault on a well-defended position is almost always the worst available option. Knowing yourself clearly, strengths, weaknesses, limits, biases, is a strategic asset, not a therapy exercise. Knowing the other party, their motives, fears, constraints, and plans, is equally essential and often more actionable. The most sophisticated people in any room are usually the ones working hardest to avoid the fight they could easily win. Applying it at work. Most workplace conflict follows a predictable and wasteful pattern. Someone feels wronged or blocked. Frustration builds. Eventually there's a confrontation, in a meeting, over email, through a manager, that damages the relationship, produces a messy resolution, and leaves both parties slightly worse off than before. Sun Tzu would look at this pattern and ask the question almost nobody asks before a workplace conflict escalates: what does the other person actually want, and is there a way to give them enough of it that the fight becomes unnecessary? This is the attack the strategy principle in practice. Before you confront a difficult colleague, understand what's driving their behavior. Before you push back on a decision, understand why it was made and what the decision maker is trying to protect. Before you escalate to HR or your manager's manager, ask whether there's a resolution available at the current level that you haven't fully explored. This is not about being a pushover. It's about being effective. The person at work who consistently resolves tension before it becomes conflict, who finds the creative solution, brokers the quiet agreement, addresses the thing before it explodes, is not the one avoiding difficulty. They're the one operating at the highest strategic level available. The know yourself principle applies here with particular sharpness. Most workplace conflicts are made worse by people who have a genuine blind spot about their own role in them. The colleague who creates tension without realizing it. The manager who micromanages because of anxiety they haven't examined. The person who always just asks questions in meetings but is actually signaling status. If you can see your own patterns clearly, especially the unflattering ones, you can change them before they create the battles that didn't need to happen. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Think of a current or recent workplace tension. Before deciding how to handle it, answer these two questions. What does the other person actually want here, underneath the surface position they're taking? What role, honestly, have I played in creating or sustaining this tension? Before you raise your voice, exhaust every option that doesn't require it, because the fight you avoid cleanly costs you nothing, while the fight you win badly can cost you everything. Chapter 4. Tactical Positioning. Before you try to win, make sure you cannot lose. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The Original Wisdom. Chapter 4 is where Sun Tzu shifts from talking about how to defeat others to talking about something far less glamorous and far more important: how to make yourself undefeatable first. The opening is almost counterintuitive in a book about war. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, and then waited for an opportunity to defeat the enemy. The sequence matters enormously. First, invulnerability. Then, opportunity. Not simultaneously. Not the other way around. Sun Tzu draws a sharp distinction. Security against defeat implies defensive tactics. Ability to defeat the enemy means taking the offensive. Defense and offense are not opposites on a spectrum. They serve completely different purposes. Confusing the two, attacking when you should be consolidating, defending when the moment calls for action, is one of the most common and costly strategic errors a person can make. He then says something that stings a little: one may know how to conquer without being able to do it. You can understand exactly what needs to happen and still be in no position to make it happen, because you haven't done the foundational work of building an unassailable base first. Sun Tzu introduces the concept of shi, often translated as strategic advantage or potential energy. He compares it to water held behind a dam, or a boulder perched at the top of a mountain. The energy isn't being used yet. But it's there, fully loaded, waiting. A well-positioned general doesn't need to fight hard because the position itself does most of the work. The whole chapter is a case for one underappreciated truth: The most important work you will ever do is the work nobody sees, the preparation, the positioning, the quiet building of foundations that makes everything else possible. The core principles. Make yourself impossible to destroy before you try to win. Security first, opportunity second. Defense and offense serve different purposes and must not be confused with each other. Understanding the right move and being positioned to execute it are two entirely different things. Strategic advantage is potential energy, built quietly, held in reserve, released at the right moment. The strongest position is one where even inaction cannot hurt you. Precise measurement of your resources, and honest accounting of your gaps, is the foundation of real confidence. The most important work is often the least visible, the preparation, the foundations, the positioning that makes the decisive moment possible. Applying it at work. There is a particular kind of professional anxiety that comes from knowing your position is fragile, where one bad quarter, one change in management, one reorg could leave you exposed. Most people respond to this anxiety by working harder within the existing situation, hoping that effort alone is enough to hold the ground. Sun Tzu would suggest something different: build the position first. What does an unassailable professional position actually look like? It's not tenure or a long title. It's a combination of things that make you genuinely difficult to remove and genuinely easy to trust with more. A track record of delivering clearly and consistently. Relationships across the organization that aren't dependent on any single manager's opinion of you. Skills that are relevant and demonstrably current. A reputation built on substance rather than politics. And crucially, options. The professional who has no alternatives to their current job is negotiating from the most vulnerable position possible. Sun Tzu's sequence, invulnerability first, then opportunity, is exactly the right order for career development. Too many people chase the next promotion, the bigger role, the visible project, before they've consolidated the foundations of where they currently are. They're trying to attack before they've secured the base. The result is often that they stretch into a bigger role without the positioning to sustain it and come back smaller than before. The concept of potential energy held in reserve, has a direct professional equivalent: the reputation and capability you've built that you haven't needed to call on yet. The relationship with a senior person that you've never leveraged. The skill you've been developing quietly. The goodwill in your team from years of reliable delivery. This is stored energy. It doesn't announce itself. But when you need it, it's there, and people who haven't built it discover its absence at the worst possible moment. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Audit your professional position honestly across 4 dimensions. Relationships: who in the organization genuinely vouches for you, beyond your direct manager? Track record: what have you delivered that is unambiguously yours? Skills: what can you do that is genuinely current and valuable? Options: what alternatives do you have if your current role disappeared tomorrow? The most important investments you will ever make are the ones that mean you cannot be destroyed, because everything you build on top of that foundation stands on solid ground. Chapter 5. Energy and momentum. It's not just what you do, it's when you do it, and how you make it land. The onset of troops is like the rush of a torrent which will even roll stones along in its course. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The original wisdom. Chapter 5 is where Sun Tzu gets almost poetic. After 4 chapters of careful, methodical preparation, he suddenly starts talking about something harder to pin down: the quality of force. Not just how much power you have, but how you deploy it. Not just what you do, but the way it hits. He opens with the difference between Cheng and Qi, the direct force and the indirect force. The orthodox and the unorthodox. The expected move and the surprise. In all fighting, the direct method may be used for joining battle, but indirect methods will be needed to secure victory. Sun Tzu says the combinations of direct and indirect force are as inexhaustible as the movements of the sun and moon. He is making the point that creativity and strategy is not a finite resource. There is always another angle. The person who thinks they've exhausted their options almost always hasn't. They've exhausted their obvious options. That's a very different thing. Then comes the concept of strategic energy, the momentum built up by positioning and timing. Sun Tzu uses two images. The first is a boulder released from a mountain height. The energy isn't in the pushing, it's in the setup. The second is a hawk striking its prey. The timing is so precise that the strike breaks the spine before the prey can react. What he's describing is the difference between force that is manufactured in the moment, through effort, willpower, and direct application, and force that has been building and is now released at exactly the right instant. The latter is categorically more powerful. And it requires two things that most people undervalue: patience in the building and decisiveness in the release. The chapter ends with a note on how great commanders seek victory from the situation itself rather than demanding it from individual people. The skill is in the setup, not the struggle. The core principles. Direct force engages, indirect force wins. You need both, in the right sequence. The combinations of approach are inexhaustible. When obvious options are exhausted, unconventional ones remain. Strategic energy is potential force released at precisely the right moment. It multiplies effort rather than replacing it. Timing transforms the same action from ordinary to powerful. The identical move lands completely differently depending on when it arrives. The most powerful force is not manufactured in the moment but built through positioning and released through patience. Create conditions where the right outcome becomes almost inevitable, rather than forcing outcomes through sheer effort. Decisiveness at the moment of release is just as important as patience in the building. Applying it at work. Most people at work operate almost entirely in direct force mode. They work harder, stay later, produce more, push louder. And up to a point, this works. But very few careers are built on direct force alone. The indirect force in a career context is the unexpected angle, the move that reframes the situation rather than fighting within it. The person who, instead of competing for the same promotion as 3 colleagues, identifies a gap nobody is addressing and builds their reputation there. The employee who solves a problem their manager didn't know they had. The professional who builds a relationship across the organization, quietly, genuinely, without agenda, and finds years later that it opens a door that direct effort alone never would have. Timing is everything here, and it's one of the most underappreciated career skills. The same idea, pitched at the wrong moment, gets dismissed. Pitched when the organization is ready for it, when the problem it solves has just become urgent, when the decision maker is in the right frame of mind, it lands like the hawk strike. People who develop a feel for organizational timing operate with a kind of leverage that raw talent alone can't match. The boulder on the mountain image applies directly to professional momentum. The person who has been quietly delivering, building relationships, and developing skills for 2 years has stored energy that the person who just arrived hasn't. When the moment comes, the release of that stored momentum looks effortless to observers. It is not effortless. It was built. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Identify one goal you're currently pursuing at work primarily through direct force. Then ask, what is the indirect move here, the unexpected angle, the creative reframe, the relationship or positioning play that could achieve the same outcome with more leverage? Write down 2 options you haven't tried. The most powerful move is rarely the most obvious one. It's the right angle, at the right moment, released from a foundation that was built when nobody was watching. Chapter 6. Weak points and strong. Don't fight where they're ready for you. Strike where they aren't. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The original wisdom. If Chapter 5 was about the quality and timing of force, Chapter 6 is about its direction. And Sun Tzu's instruction here is almost disarmingly simple: go where they are not. He opens with a principle that cuts against every instinct of the direct competitor. Whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted. The advantage belongs to whoever controls where and when the engagement happens. From there, Sun Tzu develops what might be the most tactically precise section of the entire book. You can be sure of succeeding in your attacks if you only attack places which are undefended. This sounds obvious. It is almost never practiced. Most people attack exactly where the other party is most prepared and most defended, simply because that's where the obvious confrontation exists. He introduces the idea of making the opponent come to you, by creating something they value, threatening something they can't afford to lose. Control is not about brute force. It's about dictating the terms of engagement. Then comes the water metaphor. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. The soldier works out his victory in relation to the foe he is facing. Rigidity loses. Adaptability wins. Sun Tzu closes with a note that has unsettled military strategists for centuries. So in war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. Not just sometimes. Always. The path to victory runs through the gaps, not through the walls. The core principles. Arrive first and set the terms. Whoever controls the ground controls the engagement. Attack what is undefended, not what is fortified. The obvious confrontation is usually the wrong one. Make opponents come to you by threatening what they cannot afford to lose. Strength and weakness are not fixed, they shift constantly with conditions, and you must read them in real time. Adaptability is not inconsistency, it is the highest form of strategic intelligence. Your approach must be shaped by the specific opponent and conditions you face, not by habit or preference. The path to victory always runs through the gaps, find them before you move. Applying it at work. Every workplace has a map of strong points and weak points, defended territory and open ground, and the people who navigate careers most effectively learn to read it accurately. The strong points are the areas that are already claimed, already contested, already crowded with capable people competing on the same terms. The obvious promotion track. The high visibility project that everyone wants a piece of. Competing here is not impossible, but it is exhausting. You are attacking fortified positions, and even victories are costly. The weak points, the open ground, are almost always less obvious and less glamorous, at least initially. The problem nobody has claimed ownership of yet. The unglamorous but genuinely important function that capable people avoid because it isn't shiny enough. The gap between two teams that creates friction nobody is solving. The skill that is about to become critical but hasn't been recognized as such yet. These are the undefended places. The make them come to you principle as a direct professional application becomes so clearly valuable in a specific, well-defined area that opportunities are drawn to you rather than requiring you to chase them. The specialist who is genuinely the best available at one specific thing creates a form of professional leverage that generalists rarely achieve. Reading your own weak points with the same honesty is equally essential. The colleague who exploits a gap in your knowledge. The situation where your communication style consistently creates friction. The type of work that reliably reveals your limits. Knowing these clearly means you can either address them deliberately or simply avoid putting yourself in positions where they become decisive. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Draw a simple map of your professional landscape. Mark the strong points, the crowded, contested areas where competition is fierce. Mark the weak points, the gaps, the unclaimed territory, the problems nobody owns. Ask honestly, where am I spending most of my energy? And where's the open ground that I'm walking past every day? Stop attacking the walls. Find the gate that's already open, because the most efficient path to where you want to go is almost never the most obvious one. Chapter 7. Maneuvering. The obstacle is not in your way. It is the way, if you're willing to think differently about it. Let your rapidity be that of the wind, your compactness that of the forest. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The Original Wisdom. Chapter 7 opens with a problem that every strategist and every person trying to get somewhere meaningful will recognize immediately. The most direct path is rarely the one that actually gets you there. Sun Tzu begins with the challenge of maneuvering. Nothing is more difficult than the tactical maneuvers. The difficulty of tactical maneuvering consists in turning the devious into the direct, and the apparently disadvantageous into the advantageous. The skill is not finding the direct path and following it. The skill is taking what appears to be a roundabout, indirect, even disadvantageous route, and turning it into your most direct line to victory. Sun Tzu is saying something more sophisticated. Sometimes the detour is the shortcut, and the obstacle is the most important part of the journey. He illustrates this with a military example. A general who sends troops racing ahead to seize an advantage, without accounting for the pace of the march, the state of the supply lines, or the condition of the soldiers, arrives at the destination with a depleted, exhausted force that cannot capitalize on the position they've just reached. Speed without coordination is not an advantage. It is a new problem wearing the costume of progress. Sun Tzu also talks about the management of energy across a force. He notes the difference between morning spirit, sharp, fresh, full of intention, and the spirit of late afternoon, which has grown heavy and dull. Don't engage a force at its peak. Wait for the dip. The chapter closes pointing toward the same underlying wisdom: rigidity kills. The general who responds to every situation with the same move is not disciplined. They are brittle. And brittle things break under pressure. The core principles. The path that appears indirect or disadvantageous is often the most direct route to the real objective. Speed without coordination is not progress, it is a new problem created by impatience. Energy management across a campaign matters as much as the tactics of any individual engagement. Engage opponents at their low points, not their peaks, timing your moves around their energy, not just your own readiness. Local knowledge, understanding the specific terrain you're operating on, is a prerequisite for effective adaptation. Rigidity is a form of brittleness. The ability to change approach without losing direction is one of the highest strategic skills. Turning obstacles into advantages is not optimism. It is a learnable discipline that requires honest, precise thinking about what the obstacle actually is. Applying it at work. Every career has a stretch that doesn't look like progress from the inside. The sideways move that felt like a demotion but turned out to be the development experience that made everything else possible. The difficult manager who was genuinely unpleasant to work for but whose standards permanently raised your baseline. The project that felt like a punishment assignment but put you in front of people and problems you never would have encountered on the obvious path. These are Sun Tzu's devious routes turned direct. They don't feel like shortcuts while you're in them. They feel like detours. The difference between the person who extracts full value from them and the person who simply endures them is the ability to ask, at the beginning of the apparent obstacle, what is actually available here, if I approach this as an opportunity rather than an inconvenience? The energy management principle from this chapter has a precise professional application: the timing of difficult conversations and high-stakes requests. The colleague who brings a contentious proposal to a team meeting on a Friday afternoon, when everyone is depleted and resistant, is fighting against the energy of the room. The same proposal, brought on a Tuesday morning after a win, lands in completely different conditions. The content hasn't changed. The timing has changed everything. Sun Tzu's note about racing ahead without coordinating the supply lines is a direct description of what happens when ambitious people take on more than their current infrastructure can support. The promotions sought before the skills are consolidated. The team expanded before the culture is strong enough to absorb new people. Coordination, between ambition and capability, between speed and sustainability, is not caution. It is what makes the advance stick. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Identify one obstacle or apparent setback in your professional life right now. Ask honestly, what is actually available in this situation that wouldn't be available on the straightforward path? Write down at least 2 things this obstacle is giving you access to: relationships, knowledge, resilience, perspective, that the easy route wouldn't have provided. The person who can look at what is blocking them and ask, what does this make possible? Instead of only, how do I remove this? Will consistently find paths that the rigid thinker never sees. Chapter 8. Variation of tactics. The rules that saved you yesterday may be exactly what destroys you tomorrow. The general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace is the jewel of the kingdom. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The original wisdom. Chapter 8 is one of the shortest in the art of war, and one of the most unsettling. Because what Sun Tzu is really saying here is that the thing most people rely on most heavily, their established approach, their proven methods, their hard-won rules, can become the very source of their defeat if applied without judgment. He opens with a list of tactical principles. There are roads not to follow, armies not to attack, towns not to besiege, positions not to contest, commands from the sovereign not to obey. This last one is the most startling. A commander in the field, Sun Tzu says, must be willing to override orders from above if the ground reality makes those orders wrong. The underlying principle is radical: no rule is absolute. Every tactical principle, every piece of received wisdom, every best practice, every rule of thumb, was derived from a specific set of conditions. When those conditions change, the rule must change with them. He then identifies 5 dangerous character flaws in a commander. The first is recklessness. The second is cowardice. The third is a quick temper. The fourth is excessive concern for reputation. And the fifth is excessive compassion, the one so focused on avoiding any harm to those they care for that they cannot make the hard calls that the situation demands. Each of these flaws leads to ruin in a specific and predictable way. They are structural vulnerabilities, and a smart opponent who identifies them will exploit them deliberately and reliably. The chapter ends: the general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service, is the jewel of the kingdom. The person who can act correctly, advancing or retreating as the situation demands, free from ego distortions, is the rarest and most valuable kind of leader. The core principles. No rule is absolute. Every principle was derived from specific conditions and must be adapted when those conditions change. The ability to vary tactics in theory is worthless without the ability to do it in practice, under pressure, in real time. There are situations, positions, and battles that should simply be refused. Knowing what not to engage is as important as knowing how to engage. 5 character flaws: recklessness, cowardice, quick temper, excessive concern for reputation, and excessive compassion, create predictable and exploitable vulnerabilities. A smart opponent will probe for your character weaknesses and use them against you deliberately. The ability to advance without ego and retreat without shame is among the rarest and most powerful qualities a person can develop. Rigid adherence to any system, however good, eventually produces the conditions for that system's failure. Applying it at work. Every experienced professional has a set of rules they live by, approaches that have worked before, principles derived from hard experience. This is not a problem. Pattern recognition built from experience is genuinely valuable. The problem arrives when those rules calcify. When they stop being tools and become identity. When "this is how I work" becomes indistinguishable from "this is who I am," and any challenge to the approach feels like a personal attack rather than useful information. Sun Tzu's point is not that experience is worthless. It's that every rule of thumb was derived from a particular context, and when the context changes, the rule must be re-examined. The manager whose leadership style was forged in a fast-paced startup environment and who applies it unchanged to a large, complex organization is following a road that should not be followed. The 5 character flaws are worth examining with uncomfortable honesty in a professional context. Recklessness shows up as the person who is always pushing for the bold move, not because the situation calls for it but because caution feels like weakness. Cowardice shows up as the endless deferral, the decision that keeps getting kicked. Quick temper shows up in the professional who can be reliably baited into an emotional response. Excessive concern for reputation is perhaps the most common professional flaw of all. It shows up as the person who won't take on a project that might fail publicly, who manages their image in meetings rather than contributing honestly, who avoids the difficult conversation because being seen as difficult costs more to them than the problem the conversation would solve. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Of Sun Tzu's 5 character flaws, which one do you recognize most clearly in yourself as a recurring pattern in your professional life? Be specific about how it shows up at work. Has anyone ever exploited this pattern in you, used it to get a reaction or outcome that served them rather than you? The honest answer to that question is the most useful information you can have about where your judgment is most vulnerable. The person who can hold their hard-won rules loosely enough to set them aside when the situation demands it, without losing their judgment or their values, is operating at a level that rigid thinkers simply cannot reach. Chapter 9. The Army on the March. Everything around you is telling you something. The question is whether you're listening. We are not fit to lead an army on the march unless we are familiar with the face of the country. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The Original Wisdom. Chapter 9 is unlike anything else in The Art of War. After 8 chapters of strategic principles and philosophical frameworks, Sun Tzu suddenly gets forensically, almost obsessively specific. He describes how to read a landscape, where to camp near water but not in it, how to recognize an ambush from the behavior of birds overhead, what it means when the enemy's envoys speak humbly but their preparations accelerate. At first glance it can feel like a departure. But read carefully, it is the most practical expression of Sun Tzu's deepest conviction: reality is always communicating with you. Your job is to read it accurately. He moves to the art of reading signs. When the enemy's troops lean on their spears, they are exhausted. When they draw water and drink before carrying it back, they are poorly supplied. When birds take flight from a position, there is movement hidden beneath them. Each of these observations is about the same thing: the gap between what is being presented and what is actually happening. He then turns to the management of soldiers. Soldiers must be treated in the first instance with humanity, but kept under control by means of iron discipline. The greatest commanders are not those who demand obedience but those who earn it, through genuine care, through consistency, through being worthy of the trust they ask for. The chapter closes with one of the most quietly powerful lines in the book: if in training soldiers' commands are habitually enforced, the army will be well disciplined; if not, its discipline will be poor. Consistency is not a personality trait. It is a practice. And its effects accumulate. The core principles. Reality communicates constantly through signs, signals, and patterns. Accurate reading of these is a core strategic skill. The gap between what is presented and what is actually happening is almost always readable if you know what to look for. Understand the nature of your terrain before you commit to a position. Assumptions about familiar ground are where costly mistakes begin. Indirect evidence is often more reliable than direct statement. Behavior, energy, and patterns tell truer stories than words. Trust is earned through consistent humanity before it can be sustained through discipline. Consistency between what you say and what you do is not a virtue, it is the foundation of all functional authority. Reading people and environments accurately requires genuine attention, not the performance of attentiveness, but the real thing. Applying it at work. Every workplace is alive with signals that most people walk past without reading. The energy in the room before a meeting that hasn't formally started yet. The way a senior leader responds, or doesn't respond, to a particular question. The colleague whose body language and tone are slightly misaligned with their words. The project that keeps getting almost approved but never quite crosses the line. These are Sun Tzu's birds taking flight. The ability to read an organization accurately, to understand not just what is being said but what is actually happening, not just the stated priorities but the real ones, not just the official structure but the informal power map, is one of the most valuable and least formally taught professional skills. Sun Tzu's specific signs translate with remarkable directness into professional life. When communication from leadership becomes unusually formal and carefully worded, something is changing. When a previously vocal colleague goes quiet in meetings, something is shifted for them. When a project that was high priority quietly loses its executive sponsor, its fate is already decided, the announcement just hasn't been made yet. The consistency principle, commands habitually enforced, is the most important management insight in the chapter. The manager whose stated standards and actual standards diverge creates a particular kind of organizational damage that is slow to accumulate and very fast to spread. Once people learn that the stated expectation will not be enforced, they stop taking any stated expectation seriously. Rebuilding it is far harder than maintaining it would have been. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Spend 1 week deliberately paying closer attention to the indirect signals in your workplace. Keep a brief daily note. At the end of the week, ask, what did I notice that I wouldn't normally have registered? What does it suggest about what is actually happening beneath the surface of what is being said? The most valuable intelligence you will ever gather is available for free, in every environment you inhabit, but only to the person who has learned to pay real attention rather than assumed attention. Chapter 10. Terrain. The same person, the same skills, the same plan, completely different outcomes depending on the ground you're standing on. Know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will never be endangered. Know the ground and the skies, your victory will then be total. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The Original Wisdom. Chapter 10 is about something that sounds almost too simple to need a chapter, where you are matters. The ground beneath your feet shapes everything, what moves are available, what risks are acceptable, what the right decision actually is. Sun Tzu opens by cataloging 6 types of terrain, each demanding a completely different approach. Accessible ground requires you to occupy the high, sunny positions first. Entangling ground must only be entered if the enemy is unprepared, because if you advance and they are ready, retreat becomes catastrophic. Ground where neither side gains by moving first should be held, not advanced into. What runs underneath all 6 is a single discipline: read the specific situation you are actually in, not the situation you wish you were in, not the situation your standard approach was designed for. The actual situation, with its specific constraints and specific opportunities. Then Sun Tzu turns to 6 ways that armies are defeated that have nothing to do with the enemy. Flight. Insubordination. Collapse. Ruin. Disorganization. Rout. And in every case, the cause is not the opponent's strength but the commander's failure. He closes with the line that might be the most important in the chapter: know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will never be endangered. Know the ground and the skies, your victory will then be total. Self-knowledge and opponent knowledge are necessary but not sufficient. You must also know the terrain and the conditions. All 4 together produce not just victory, but complete victory. The core principles. Terrain is not a neutral backdrop, it is an active participant in every outcome, and it must be read before any decision is made. Every type of ground demands a different approach. Applying the same tactics regardless of context is how capable people produce poor results. Most defeats come not from the opponent's strength but from internal failures of leadership, structure, and culture. Self-knowledge and opponent knowledge are necessary but not sufficient. You must also understand the specific ground you're operating on. A leader who genuinely understands the situation must be willing to act on that understanding even when it conflicts with instruction or convention. Promoting the wrong people, tolerating poor performance, and confusing indulgence with care are internal failures that erode any organization from within. Complete victory requires knowing yourself, knowing the opposition, knowing the terrain, and reading the conditions, all 4, not 3. Applying it at work. The same person, with the same skills and the same approach, can thrive in one organization and struggle badly in another. This is not a mystery and it is not a character flaw. It is terrain. And most people, when they experience the struggling version, conclude something is wrong with them rather than examining whether the ground they're on is fundamentally unsuited to how they operate. Sun Tzu's 6 terrain types map onto organizational environments with uncomfortable precision. Accessible ground, where movement is free, ideas flow, and initiative is rewarded, suits certain personalities and approaches perfectly. Entangling ground, easy to enter, hard to leave, is the job or organization that looked exciting from the outside and reveals its constraints only after you've committed. Narrow passes are the organizations where a small number of gatekeepers control all meaningful advancement. The 6 internal failure modes Sun Tzu identifies are a direct description of dysfunctional workplace dynamics. Flight, capable people leaving, is not a recruitment problem. It is almost always a leadership problem. Insubordination, where the official hierarchy exists but real authority lies elsewhere, is the organization where the org chart and the actual power map are two completely different documents. The terrain principle has a direct and practical application for anyone making a career decision. The questions most people ask before accepting a job are about the role itself. Sun Tzu would ask first about the ground. What kind of organization is this, actually? What type of terrain am I entering? Who holds the real power, and what do they actually value? What happens to people who succeed here, and what happens to the ones who don't? These are terrain questions. They determine whether your skills and approach will be assets or liabilities in this specific environment. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Think about your current professional environment. Which of Sun Tzu's terrain types does it most resemble: accessible, entangling, contested, or something else? Is this terrain suited to how I actually operate, or am I fighting the ground as well as the work? If it's the latter, what would need to change, in the environment, in your approach, or in both? Context is not the background to the decision, it is half the decision itself. The person who reads the ground they're actually on, rather than the ground they wish they were on, will consistently make better choices with the same information. Chapter 11. The 9 situations. There are moments when holding back is the most dangerous thing you can do. Throw your soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The Original Wisdom. Chapter 11 is the longest in The Art of War and, in many ways, the most intense. Sun Tzu has spent 10 chapters teaching preparation, positioning, adaptability, and restraint. Now he turns to something different: what happens when the conditions are extreme, when the stakes are existential, and when the ordinary rules of careful management no longer apply. He catalogs 9 types of ground, defined not by their physical characteristics but by their strategic and psychological implications. Dispersive ground. Facile ground. Contentious ground. Open ground. Serious ground. Difficult ground. Hemmed-in ground. And finally, desperate ground, where survival itself requires immediate, total combat. The most striking passage describes what a great general does when his army is on desperate ground. He burns the boats. He destroys the food supplies. He removes every option except forward. Throw your soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. This is the strategic use of desperation, the recognition that human beings perform at their absolute peak when there is no alternative. Sun Tzu also addresses the management of information in extreme situations. Keep your plans to yourself until the last moment, not because you don't trust your people, but because premature information creates premature fear. Give people clear direction without burdening them with uncertainty they can't act on. The chapter closes with a portrait of calm mastery in the middle of chaos. The skilled commander dismisses all clever schemes and stops all rumors. He keeps his people's eyes and ears directed to the front, and does his work without letting them know his design. Leadership stripped of performance. Just clear direction, absolute focus, and the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. The core principles. Different levels of stakes require categorically different responses. The approach suited to moderate risk is wrong for existential stakes. Desperation, deliberately created, unlocks a level of human commitment and capability that comfort never can. Removing the option to retreat is sometimes the most powerful strategic move available. It transforms the psychology of everyone involved. Keep plans close until the moment of execution. Premature disclosure creates fear without enabling action. Unity of purpose, earned through consistent trustworthy leadership, is more powerful than any tactical advantage. The best leaders in extreme situations provide clear direction without performing confidence, calm focus, not theatrical certainty. Understanding sometimes follows commitment rather than preceding it. You don't always need to fully understand before you fully commit. Applying it at work. Most professional lives are spent on dispersive ground or facile ground, situations where the stakes are real but not existential, where retreat is always available, where the comfortable option exists and is taken regularly. This is not a criticism. Most of the time, this is entirely appropriate. But there are moments, specific, identifiable moments, when the dispersive ground approach applied to an existential situation produces precisely the kind of half-committed, one foot in one foot out performance that guarantees the worst outcome. The person who wants to build something genuinely new but keeps one hand on the safety rail of their current position. The team that is trying to achieve something difficult but hasn't truly burned its retreat options. Sun Tzu's desperate ground principle is not an argument for recklessness. It is an argument for recognizing when the situation genuinely calls for total commitment, and then making that commitment fully, rather than partially. There is a specific kind of failure that comes from partial commitment to a genuinely demanding endeavor. You pay most of the cost, you absorb most of the difficulty, but you don't access the level of resourcefulness and creativity that only full commitment unlocks. The information management principle has a direct professional application that many leaders get wrong in both directions. Sharing every uncertainty, every risk, every possible bad outcome with a team that cannot act on the information creates fear without enabling action. But withholding information that people need to do their jobs well creates a different kind of damage, the erosion of trust. The discipline is to share what people can act on, when they can act on it. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Identify one significant professional goal or endeavor where you are currently operating with partial commitment. Ask honestly. What would full commitment look like here? What would I do differently if retreat were not an option? You don't have to burn the boats today. But write down what burning them would mean, and sit with whether the partial commitment is serving you or costing you. Full commitment is not recklessness, it is the recognition that some things can only be achieved by people who have stopped leaving themselves a way out. Chapter 12. Attack by fire. Knowing when to burn something down is wisdom. Doing it in anger is just destruction. Move not unless you see an advantage. Use not your troops unless there is something to be gained. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The Original Wisdom. Chapter 12 opens with something that feels almost shockingly concrete. Sun Tzu catalogs 5 targets for fire attack and lists the conditions required: the right season, the right weather, the right wind. Fire, he says, is an extraordinary weapon, but only when deployed with precision, preparation, and an absolute understanding of the conditions in which it will be used. Then he says something that elevates the entire chapter from tactics to wisdom. Now, before you use fire, be sure you have the means of support. After the fire starts, wait for it to reach its height, and then attack from the front. If the enemy does not respond, wait, do not attack. The discipline being demanded is extraordinary. You have set the fire. Everything is burning. And Sun Tzu says, wait. He draws a distinction that is the moral and strategic heart of the chapter. There is a time for burning, and a time for water. Not everything should be burned. And even when fire is the right tool, timing determines whether it serves your objective or destroys the very thing you are trying to win. The chapter moves to a meditation on the relationship between anger, action, and irreversibility. 3 tests should precede every significant action. Is there genuine advantage? Is there something real to gain? Is the situation genuinely critical? And then the passage that makes this chapter genuinely important: anger may in time change to gladness, vexation may be succeeded by content. But a kingdom that has once been destroyed can never come again into being, nor can the dead ever be brought back to life. Some things, once done, cannot be undone. The core principles. Fire is a tool of extraordinary power. It requires extraordinary precision, preparation, and timing to be useful rather than destructive. Dramatic action creates the impulse to act immediately. The discipline is to wait, observe, and move only when the conditions are clear. 3 tests should precede every significant action. Is there genuine advantage? Is there something real to gain? Is the situation genuinely critical? Anger passes. Destruction doesn't. The emotional state that prompted an action will change, the consequences of the action will remain. Some things, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. The irreversibility of certain actions must be weighed before they are taken, not after. The discipline to hold full force in reserve, to not act when every instinct says act, is the rarest and most valuable form of self-command. Winning the moment at the cost of the long game is not victory. It is a more expensive form of defeat. Applying it at work. Every workplace has fire available: the escalation, the confrontation, the email that names what everyone has been avoiding, the formal complaint, the resignation, the public disagreement that changes the dynamic of a team permanently. These are not inherently wrong moves. Sometimes they are exactly the right ones. Sun Tzu is not telling you never to use fire. He is telling you to meet the conditions before you light it. The 3 tests, advantage, gain, criticality, applied before any significant professional escalation will prevent a remarkable percentage of the damage that impulsive workplace fire causes. Is there genuine advantage to this action? Will it actually improve the situation, or will it simply feel satisfying in the moment? Is there something real to gain? And is the situation genuinely critical? Does this actually require fire, or does it just feel that way because you are angry or frustrated right now? Most workplace fires fail one or more of these tests and get lit anyway. The angry email sent at 11 p.m. after a frustrating day. The escalation to senior leadership triggered by wounded pride rather than genuine necessity. The resignation announced impulsively after a bad week, before the person has another position confirmed. The irreversibility principle deserves its own moment of attention in the professional context. Careers are long. Industries are smaller than they appear. The senior person you burned a bridge with at 28 has a reasonable chance of being in a position to affect your options at 45. The reputation for being difficult, impulsive, or retaliatory, once established, is extraordinarily difficult to shift. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Think of a professional situation where you currently feel the impulse toward fire. Run it through Sun Tzu's tests. Is there genuine advantage? Will this actually improve the situation? Is there something real to gain, a specific, concrete outcome this action is likely to produce? Is the situation genuinely critical, or does it just feel that way right now? What does this look like in 5 years, from a distance? The most powerful version of you is not the one who acts on every fire, it is the one who can hold the full intensity of a difficult moment and still choose whether to burn. Chapter 13. The use of intelligence. Everything in this book is worthless without accurate information. Know what is actually true. Foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits, it must be obtained from men who know the enemy's situation. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The original wisdom. Sun Tzu closes The Art of War not with a rousing call to battle, not with a summary of everything that has come before, but with a chapter about knowledge, specifically, about the unglamorous, essential, often undervalued work of finding out what is actually true before you act on what you assume to be true. He opens with a statement that reframes every chapter that preceded it: foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits, it cannot be obtained inductively from experience, nor by any deductive calculation. Knowledge of the enemy's dispositions can only be obtained from other men. In other words, no amount of theory, intuition, or abstract reasoning replaces real information from real sources. He catalogs 5 types of intelligence agents and explains the specific role each plays in building a complete picture. What runs underneath all of this is a conviction so strong it shapes the entire chapter: the investment in real knowledge is always worth it. He writes about the converted spy, the enemy agent turned to your side, with particular emphasis. This is the most valuable of all intelligence assets, because a person who knows the enemy from the inside can tell you things that no amount of external observation could reveal. He closes by bringing the entire book full circle: without intelligence, nothing moves. Without accurate knowledge of the terrain, the enemy, and the conditions, every principle in this book becomes a sophisticated way of acting on bad assumptions. The core principles. No amount of theory, intuition, or experience substitutes for real, current, accurate information about the actual situation. The investment in genuine knowledge always costs less than the consequences of acting on false or incomplete information. The most valuable intelligence comes from people who are inside the situation, who know it from the inside out. Treating your sources of real information with genuine care, respect, and humanity is not sentiment, it is strategic necessity. The quality of every decision in this book is bounded by the quality of the information it is based on. Intelligence is not support for strategy, it is the foundation of it. The enlightened leader invests in knowing what is actually true as a first priority, not as an afterthought. Applying it at work. There is a particular kind of professional confidence that is built entirely on unexamined assumptions, and it is one of the most dangerous states a capable person can occupy. The manager who is certain they know how their team is doing without ever asking genuine questions. The professional who is sure they understand the political landscape of their organization without having tested that understanding against reality. Sun Tzu's intelligence principle, applied to professional life, starts with a discipline that sounds simple and is genuinely difficult, regularly and systematically finding out what is actually true, rather than operating on what you assume or prefer to be true. This requires asking questions you might not like the answers to. It requires creating conditions where people around you can tell you real things. The converted spy principle has a direct professional equivalent, the person who has been on the other side of a dynamic you're trying to understand and who is willing to tell you honestly what it looked like from there. The colleague who used to work for a competitor. The former employee who left the organization you're considering joining. These are your most valuable intelligence sources. The information management dimension points at something that derails many professional relationships, the tendency to act on second-hand, filtered, or outdated information as if it were current and direct. The assumption about a colleague's intentions based on something someone else reported. In each case, you are operating on processed intelligence rather than primary sources, and the processing always involves loss. Wherever possible, go to the source. Field notes. Pause here to reflect, or return to these questions after the chapter. Identify one significant assumption you are currently operating on in your professional life, something you believe to be true about your situation or the people around you, that you have not actually verified through direct inquiry. Ask, what would I need to do to find out whether this is actually true? Then do that thing, and pay close attention to whether the reality matches the assumption. The gap, when it exists, is the most useful professional information you can have. All the strategy in the world is only as good as the information it stands on, and the most important information you will ever gather is the truth about what is actually happening, in your world and in yourself, right now. Conclusion. The art of working, what Sun Tzu was really teaching all along. You have now spent 13 chapters in the company of one of the most precise strategic minds in human history. And if this audiobook has done its job, you are not finishing it with a collection of interesting ideas about ancient warfare. You are finishing it with a set of living tools, specific, tested, applicable, for the actual conditions of your professional life. Before you close this chapter, it is worth stepping back and asking what all of this, taken together, is really saying. Because Sun Tzu's 13 chapters are not 13 separate lessons. They are one lesson, expressed 13 different ways. The one idea. At its deepest level, the art of war is about the relationship between clarity and action. Not action alone. Sun Tzu has no patience for the person who simply charges forward, driven by energy and confidence, without having thought carefully about what they are doing and why. And not clarity alone, the person who understands everything perfectly but never commits, never moves, never brings their full force to bear at the decisive moment, achieves nothing. The entire book is a discipline for developing the kind of clarity that makes action effective, and the kind of action that clarity makes possible. Know yourself. Know your situation. Know the terrain. Know the conditions. Know the other party. Then move, decisively, at the right moment, with the right force, in the right direction. That is the whole of it. Everything else is elaboration. What you now know. You know, from chapter 1, that preparation is not a preliminary to the real work. It is the real work. The person who thinks longest and most honestly before they move carries an advantage into every professional situation that no amount of in-the-moment talent can fully overcome. You know, from chapter 2, that everything has a cost, and that cost compounds with time. The prolonged project, the unresolved conflict, the draining commitment that has long since stopped moving toward any real victory, these are depleting the resource that everything else depends on: your energy, your morale, your capacity to engage fully with what actually matters. You know, from Chapter 3, that the fight you avoid cleanly costs you nothing. That the highest strategic skill in the workplace is not the ability to win confrontations but the ability to make them unnecessary. You know, from Chapter 4, that the most important professional work you will ever do is invisible. The foundation building, the reputation building, the quiet accumulation of capability and relationship and resilience that means you cannot be easily removed, this unglamorous work is what everything else rests on. You know, from Chapter 5, that timing transforms everything. The same idea, the same request, the same proposal, at the right moment and the wrong moment, produces completely different outcomes. You know, from Chapter 6, that the obvious confrontation is almost always the wrong one. That the path to professional advancement runs through the gaps, not through the walls. You know, from Chapter 7, that obstacles are terrain, not enemies. That the sideways move, the difficult assignment, the challenging manager, each of these contains something available that the straightforward path wouldn't have provided. You know, from Chapter 8, that rigid rules are a form of brittleness. That the approach which served you perfectly in one organization may be precisely wrong in another. That your character vulnerabilities, whatever they are exploitable by people who know what they are. You know, from Chapter 9, that everything around you in your workplace is communicating with you, constantly, through signals and patterns and the gap between what is presented and what is actually happening. You know, from Chapter 10, that context is half the decision. That the same person, the same skills, the same approach, will produce completely different outcomes in different organizational terrain. You know, from Chapter 11, that some things can only be achieved by people who have stopped leaving themselves a way out. That partial commitment to a genuinely demanding professional endeavor produces the worst possible outcome, all of the cost, none of the breakthrough. You know, from Chapter 12, that the most powerful version of you at work is not the one who acts on every frustration, every injustice, every provocation. It is the one who can hold the full intensity of a difficult professional moment and still choose whether to burn. And you know, from Chapter 13, that all of this, every principle, every discipline, every carefully developed capability, is only as good as the information it stands on. The practice. None of what Sun Tzu teaches becomes useful through listening alone. It becomes useful through practice, through the repeated, imperfect, gradually improving application of these principles to real situations, real decisions, and real professional relationships. The field notes at the end of each chapter were designed with this in mind. But the practice is not limited to those prompts. Every significant professional decision you face is an opportunity to ask, have I laid my plans? Every workplace conflict you encounter is an opportunity to ask, what is the highest order resolution available here? Every moment of strong impulse to act is an opportunity to apply the 3 tests: advantage, gain, criticality, before the fire is lit. It is about becoming more deliberate, more honest, more willing to do the preparation that most people skip, more capable of the patience that most professional situations reward, more able to bring your full self, your genuine capabilities, your real understanding, your honest assessment of the ground, to the things that matter most in your work. A final word. Sun Tzu ends The Art of War with intelligence, with the insistence that everything depends on knowing what is actually true. It is a fittingly humble note for a text of such ambition. After 13 chapters of strategic wisdom, the final message is, none of this works without honesty. That honesty, with yourself, about your situation, about what you actually want and what it actually costs, is the foundation the entire book rests on. You have the principles now. You have the framework. You have, in the field notes scattered through every chapter, a set of starting points for putting them into practice. The rest is yours. The battlefield is different now. The principles are not. And you, having listened this far, having sat with these ideas long enough to let them begin to take shape in relation to your actual professional life, are more prepared than most people who will ever face the situations you are about to walk back into. Go! Think before you move. Know the ground. Choose the right moment. And when the moment comes, act completely. The general who advances without coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service, is the jewel of the kingdom. Sun Tzu, The Art of War.